This lesson we're looking at bearings and distances, and for the junior secondary school, so it's not going to be like the bearing and distances we learn in senior secondary school. This is going to be based on scale drawing. Then we cannot talk about bearing without first of all talking about cardinal points. The cardinal points are made up of four primary directions. That is, the plane is divided into four quadrants. This plane formed, or this quadrant rather, are formed by the intersection of two perpendicular lines. When we have two lines perpendicular to each other, these two lines intersect to form four quadrants. The vertical line points to two directions, the northern direction and the southern direction, or North Pole and South Pole. While the horizontal line also points two directions, west and east. So these four directions are known as the cardinal points. Cardinal in the sense that they are reference points when we talk about bearing. So the four cardinal points, therefore, are made up of what? The north, the east, the south, and the west. That is the primary cardinal directions. And when we divide each of these angles, these four angles that are formed, if we divide each of them into equal half, then we have secondary cardinal direction or cardinal points. If I drop a line like this, that divides the angle up and the angle below into two. And I divide like this again, that gives us another cardinal directions. And so, because this line here, let me use my pencil. This line here is between north and east. Look at it. Remember, this vertical is north, while this horizontal here is east. This one is in between, and so we call it northeast. While this one here is west, this is north. This line is in between, so we call it northwest. And when you come down, again, this vertical line here ends at south, and this horizontal line here, east. This line is in between the east and the south and the east, and so we call it southeast. While this other one is in between west and south, or south and west, and so we call it southwest. If you look at it clearly, you can see that it's this vertical line that is a reference point to all these cardinal directions. Look at it. Why do we bring north first? This is northeast and northeast north. Rather, we call it northeast. And north, because it's coming from this vertical line. The same thing, if you come here, you have southeast here. Why don't we call it east south? Rather, we call it southeast. That is to tell us that this vertical line is a reference point. So in our discussion of bearing, it is this vertical line that is the cardinal or the reference point. So bearing is measured from north, from this vertical line, from the northern pole in a clockwise direction. We are coming to that, the definition of bearing. Okay? So in essence, the primary cardinal points are four: north, east, south, and west. And when these are divided into equal half, then you have the secondary cardinal point, which is southeast, southwest, and northwest. And the primary cardinal points divide the plane into four equal parts, and each of these parts is 90 degrees. That is, before we divide it into the secondary, this angle here is 90 degrees. But the moment we divide that 90 degree again to form the secondary cardinal point, each of the secondary cardinal points is 45 degrees. So 90 divided by 2 is of course 45. So that is cardinal point. This helps us to locate direction on the plane. We use them as reference point for angular direction. Okay, now having looked at the cardinal point, we can now talk about bearing. What is bearing? Bearing is the angular distance of an object measured from the North Pole in a clockwise direction. When I was talking about the cardinal point just now, I mentioned that the vertical line is the reference. That, let me draw that again. Have this, call this north, call this south, west, and east. Why is it that when we divide this into two, we call it northeast, Why is it not east north? Northeast is to tell us that this vertical line is a reference. The same thing if we divide this. Why can't we call it east south? Rather, we call it southeast. That is to tell us that again the vertical line is a reference. So the angular distance measured from the North Pole in a clockwise direction is known as bearing. What does that mean? Let's assume I live in a village. My village is situated at this very point where I painted. Now, my bearing is the angle that my village makes with the North Pole. Look at it. This angular distance from the North Pole to this line connecting my village is the bearing of my village. So in essence, the North Pole is the reference point. So every other point is measured in relation to the North Pole. So the angular measurement or the angular distance from the North Pole to every other point represent the bearing of that point. For example, bearing is used to describe the position or location of a place with reference to another place. For example, if Oyo is 25 kilometers north of Ibadan and Jeba is 70 kilometers northeast of Ilorin, we can describe this location in terms of bearing as follows. First of all, they said Oyo is 25 kilometers north of Ibadan, meaning Ibadan is a reference point here. As I say, north of Ibadan. So first of all, you can use a point to represent Ibadan. So let's call this point here, let's call it Ibadan. And then they say Oyo is north of Ibadan. Where is north? Let's draw a line, of course. The vertical line here is the north line. So north is going up like this. And they say that Oyo is 25 kilometers north of Ibadan. What they are saying is starting from Ibadan here, which is this point that we paint, for you to get to Oyo, you have to go in the northern direction. That is this straight line. And you will cover a distance, linear distance in this case, of 25 kilometers. Therefore, Oyo will be somewhere here. Oyo will be somewhere here. And from this point to this point, my measurement should be 25 kilometers. That is Oyo being 25 kilometers north of Ibadan. From our cardinal point, where is north? This is north, this is south, this is west, and this is east. And so because Oyo is north of Ibadan, so we draw a straight line from Ibadan going to Oyo in the northern direction. While the second one says Jeba is 70 kilometers northeast of Ilorin, meaning Ilorin is a reference point in this case. So you draw a point and call it Ilorin, and with your cardinal point, I shouldn't have cleaned that. This is north, this is south, this is west, and this is east. Now, let's draw a point and call it Ilori because Ilori is a reference point. Jeba is 70 kilometers northeast of Ilori. This is Ilori, Z double L or one L, I'm not sure. Okay. So where is northeast? Look at northeast is here. So put your cardinal point on Ilori. Draw your cardinal point on Ilori. That is the cardinal point, and that is the position of Ilori. To locate the position of Jeba, since it is northeast of Ilori, we are going to draw a line going in northeastern direction, which is this line here. Since this is north and this is east, and so this line here is northeast. Therefore, this position right here is Jeba. Is a Jeba. And according to the distance given to us, to 70 kilometers away from Ilorin. That is how to locate position of places using bearing. So bearing is what? The angular distance of an object measured from the North Pole in a clockwise direction. We have an example here. And the example says, in the figure below, what is the bearing of B from A from B? There are 2 points here represented by letter A and letter B. And they want us to calculate or to find the bearing of one point from another point. The first one says B from A. B from A, meaning A is a reference point. So when they say B from A, they are asking for this angle here, B from A. Remember that the bearing of a place is the angular distance of that place taken from the North Pole in a clockwise direction. So the angle here is a bearing of B from A, and this is north, this is east here. If I bring this line down, that will be south. If I extend it here, that will be west. So in which direction is this line A be going to? That is northeast. So the bearing of B from A, the angle is not given, you don't know unless we are to use a protractor rather to measure that, but that is not what they ask us. They just want us to give the direction, not the value of the angle. So in this case, the bearing of B from A is northeast, northeast. While the bearing of A from B, A from B, A from B, meaning B is the reference, A from B. A from B starts all the way to this point. So that if you are to give the angle, because if you are to give the value of the angle, we are going to measure the whole of this angle so that the bearing of A from B will be, we don't know the angle, so we just need to give the value in terms of direction only. What direction is this? This is south, this is north, this is west, and this is east, meaning A from B is southwest. This one is southwest. South. In other words, point A from B is southwest of point A, rather, is southwest of point B. Okay, so A from B is southwest. Now, there are two ways we can describe, or two methods of describing the directions from the reference point. One of the ways is acute angle or compass bearing, and the other one is three-digit or surveyor's method. Now, acute angle or compass bearing is when you report the angular measurement only with either southeast, northeast, or northwest, all of that. That is, in terms of when you say acute angle, that is an angle that is less than 90 degrees. So sometimes you may report the bearing of a point, and the value of the angle is usually less than 90 degrees. While some other time you report bearing using three digits, which is called surveyor's method. So for example, if I have the bearing of a point, maybe I have a point here, and the bearing of that point, maybe from here to here is 60 degrees, then reporting this in terms of acute angle or compass bearing, we can write this as 60 degree. Now this is north and this is east, 60 degree northeast. This type of representation is what we call acute angle or compass bearing. Compass bearing because these cardinal points we are talking about, they are compass points. So whenever you report bearing in terms of this cardinal point, using angles that are less than 90 degrees, that is acute or compass bearing. Now, some other time we can represent bearing using three digits. So for example, instead of writing this 60 degree northeast, you may see it written like 060 degree. This is three digits or surveyor's method of representing bearing. Another one may have something like this. Let me do this and draw another one. May have maybe a point here. Then if I connect a line to that point, and then the bearing of that point, the angle from the north to the point. Now this angle, the whole of this first quadrant is 90 degrees. So 90 plus, let's assume this small one here is, let's say it's 45. So 90 plus 45, 90 plus 45, that is 135. So this angle, you can write it as, putting the bearing rather, you can write it as 135 degree in terms of three-digit bearing. But for, what is it called? Compass bearing or acute angle bearing, we are not going to write it that way. Rather, since this is 45, The remaining one here too is 45. We write it in terms of acute angle or compass bearing. That is 45 degree southwest, southeast rather. This is south and this is east. So this bearing here is 45 degrees southeast. That is from the south, move 45 degrees towards east. That is the meaning of that. But when you use three-digit bearing, we are measuring all the way from here. And so we report the angle, which is 135 degrees. But for acute angle of compass bearing, we only measure this angle here and then report in terms of the cardinal point, southeast or southwest or northeast, all of that. Give another example. We have something like this and this point here. For acute angle bearing or compass bearing, let's assume this angle is, let's assume from here all the way to this point is 320 degree. That is three digits or surveyor's method. And in terms of acute angle or compass bearing, to this remaining angle we are going to measure the acute angle, which is 60 degree, no, 40 degree. From here to here is already 320. So it's this smaller angle here, which is 40 degree. So in terms of acute angle or compass bearing, to report that, remember this is north, this is south, this is west, and this is east. So this angle or this bearing of this line is 40 degree northwest. As it is acute angle or compass bearing. These are the compass points, northwest. Okay, so like I said earlier, so the acute angle or compass bearing involves using acute angle that the line connecting the place to the reference point makes with either the north, the east, the west, or the south. We use what? Acute angle to describe the bearing of that point. That is, we measure the angle that connects that very point to the reference point, the angle, and report in terms of the acute angle. In this case, we don't measure from the north and go in the clockwise direction. Remember, we define bearing as angular distance of a place, measure in a clockwise direction. So that if I am describing the bearing of this line, for example, I have to measure all the way from the north pole until I touch the line. That will give me the bearing of that one. But in terms of acute angle or compass bearing, I don't need to do that. It is this acute angle here, this acute angle here, which is acute angle is angle less than 90 degrees. This acute angle I need to measure. And once I measure it, then I report in terms of the cardinal point. This is north, this is south, this is west, and this is east. So that if this line here, all the way, this angular distance, all the way from the north to this line, let's assume it's 330 degrees. Then the bearing of this line in terms of acute angle or compass bearing will be this acute angle here, which is 30 degree. And to report this, this is 30 degree northwest. Northwest because the line is in northwestern direction. Then the acute angle from north to that very point is 30 degree. That is, start from north and move 30 degree towards the west. So whenever you describe bearing like this using an acute angle, we call it the acute angle bearing or the compass bearing. You can see the compass point there, northwest. So we use the cardinal point north, east, west, or south to describe acute angle bearing or compass bearing. Now we have an example here. It says state the bearing of the following. For the first one, that is 26 degrees. Let me draw it very well. So I see it's too faint. I have this. My line is not straight enough because I'm not using a ruler. This is north, this is south, this is west, and this is east. Then you have a line according to that diagram. The angle here is 26 degrees. We're using acute angle or compass bearing. That is 26 degree northeast. Northeast. Then the second one, question B. Let me draw that first. Then we have this, and we have this. Then we have a line that is coming all this. This angle here is 69 degree. In terms of compass bearing, This is north, south, west, east. Therefore, the bearing of this line here is 69 degrees southwest. That is 69 degrees southwest because the line is in southwestern direction. And the angle from the reference line, which is this vertical line, the angle from it is 69 degrees. That is compass bearing. Then the last one, the angle here, and here is 54 degrees. In terms of compass bearing, this is north, this is south, this is west, this is east. So this bearing, the bearing of this line is, remember that is this vertical line that is our reference point. So we cannot say that the bearing of this is 54 degrees southeast. That would be wrong. This angle that we need to measure inside because the vertical line is the reference point. So this angle is the angle that we need to measure. And how do we get that? Each of these quadrant is 90 degrees. So if the way I draw it doesn't make sense because looking at this look what's it called, smaller than this. Sure, let me draw it better. Even though we are not measuring, but our drawing should reflect the reality of things to some extent. This one is much better. This is 54 degrees. So to report this in terms of compass bearing, what would be the answer? Here is north, here is south, here is west, and here is east. So in compass bearing, it is this vertical line, the north and south pole, that is our reference point, not the horizontal line. So we cannot call this one 54 degree southeast. That would be wrong. Rather, it is this angle that we need to measure. This angle here that we need to measure. Now, how do we get that angle? Each of these quadrants is 90 degrees. That is from here like this and this line. The intersection of this vertical line and horizontal line forms a quadrant, which is 90 degrees. So if it is 90 degrees and here is 54, what will be the remaining one? That will be 90 minus 54. And 90 minus 54, that should be 26. So the bearing of this line is 26 degrees southeast, not 54 degrees southeast. That would be wrong. The bearing of this very point in the sheet is 90 minus 54, which is 26. So 26 degrees southeast is the bearing of this line here. Never you make the mistake of reporting this directly because this angle is not formed with the reference line. The reference line is the vertical line. That is the point we are making here, not the horizontal line. So you can't report this as 54 degree. You write it like this directly and say 54 degrees southeast. This is wrong. Find the value of this angle. Is this angle that is your bearing, the bearing of this line, in terms of acute angle bearing or compass bearing. So that is one way to describe bearing. Another way is a three-digit bearing or the surveyor's method. And this one involves using the three-digit numbers, and the angle is measured from the North Pole in a clockwise direction. So like the example we just did, where we have this last one, where we have this angle to be 54. If it is three-digit bearing that we want to use to describe this, then we have to measure all the way from the North Pole to this line, so that in terms of three-digit bearing, this bearing of this line will be, this quadrant here is 90 degrees, then plus this angle given to us, 90 plus 54, that is 144. And so the bearing of this line from the North Pole is 144 degrees for three-digit bearing. In that case, the North Pole is a reference point. The angle measured from the North Pole to the point in question is your bearing. So now let's use the same method to answer this question A and question B. In terms of the question A is already formed with the North Pole. So in that case, the compass, the three-digit bearing for this question A, we're writing it in terms of three-digit bearing. That is 0.26 degree. Now, when the angle is now to three digits, we place a 0 in front of the angle. It must be three digits. That is why we call it three digits bearing or surveyor's method. So since in question A, the angle from the North Pole is just 26 degrees. This angle here is just 26 degrees. To make a three-digit bearing, We place a 0 in front of it. Then the second one, that's question B, this one, this angle here is 69 degrees. To report the bearing of this line using 3 digits, we measure all the way from the North Pole until we get to this line. And as such, the bearing of this line from the North Pole will be this angle 90 degree plus this angle 90 degree, then plus this angle 69 degree. What am I doing? Each of these quadrants is 90 degree, 90 degree. So 90 plus 90 is 180. Then 180 plus 69, 180 plus 69, that is 249. So the bearing of this line from the North Pole in three-digit bearing is 249. Okay, we have another example here. And the example says write down the bearing of x from y from x in the following figures. Unfortunately, I did not complete the figures. I don't, where is x and where is y? It's not indicated. So let's do that first. Let me get the source of that question. This is y here, y, x, and y here, x here. Okay, so the question says you write down the bearing of x from y, and then y from x in each of these figures. Let's redraw this. First of all, we have the North Pole, which is represented with a broken line there, and then you have a line going like this. The angle here is 76. Let me draw that one. 76, that is too small to be 76. So this is 76, this question in, and this point is y this point is x. And they want us to find the bearing of x from y, that is this angle here, is the bearing of x from y. Thus, this angle is already measured from the North Pole in the clockwise direction, which is 76 degrees. So bearing x from y is equal to 76 degrees. In terms of three digits, that is 0.76 degree. You must report that in terms of compass bearing. This is the northeast. So 76 degree, 76. They didn't specify what you want to report in. 76 degree northeast for the bearing of x from y. Then what about y from x? To get y from x, you need to put a cardinal point at point x also. Now this cardinal point at point x, let me draw that here. This cardinal point at point x, this angle here is alternate to the angle given to us. Look at this. And as such, this place is 76 degrees. Remember that the bearing of a place is the angular distance from the North Pole to that place. So we are going to measure all the way from North Pole to this point. I don't want to cover that 76 since we want to make this a bit. So measuring from here to here will give you the bearing of y from x. Now, how do we calculate that? This angle here is 90 degree, and this one here too, look at it, is 90 degree. So 90 plus 90 is 180. Then 180 plus 76, 180 plus 76, that is 6 there. 8 plus 7 is 15, right? 5 carry 1. The bearing is 256 as for three-digit bearing of, let me clean this first. So the bearing of y from x is 256. And question B, let's draw it with a ruler there to make my work. This angle here is 162 degrees, and that is point y. Why this is point x? And they ask us to find the bearing of x from y first. X from y, okay? Bearing of x from y is the angular distance of this line connecting point x and y. The angular distance from the North Pole. Look at the North Pole here represented with broken line. So this angular distance here, which is 162, is the bearing of x from y. Bearing x from y is equal to 162 degrees. Now the paper say y from x. Y from x. To get y from x, you need to draw cardinal point at point x also. And looking at this, let's complete something here. I want to make a reference. And what can you say about this angle, this small angle here, and this small angle here? They are alternate angles. They are equal. This angle is equal to this angle here. You need to get the value of that angle. How do we get it? If from here to here is 162 degrees, and we know that this straight line here is 180 degrees, and what would be this small angle here? Or another way to put that, this horizontal line represented the broken line here, with this vertical line is 90 degrees. Look at it here. And you draw it. The vertical line and the horizontal line, that is 90 degrees. So this angle like this is 90 degrees. So that to get this smaller angle here, you just need to subtract 90 from 162. Since from here down to this very line here is 162. So this small one only will be 162 minus 90. 162 minus 90 degree, 72. So this angle here is 72 degree. If it is 72 degree, therefore the bearing of y from x, remember the bearing of y from x start from north all the way to this line. So this is 90, this is 90, and this is 90. That is each of these quadrants. So 90 plus 90 plus 90 is 270. Then 270 plus this 72. 270 plus 72. That is 2 then. 7 plus 7 is 14. Right, for carry on. And add the one there, 342. Therefore, the bearing of y from x is 342. Again, let me explain it so that you get it well. To get the bearing of x or y from x, the bearing of y from x is bearing measured from north in the clockwise direction. So it starts from north until we get to this line here, this line. And each of these quadrants, this is 90 degree, this is another 90 degree, this is another 90 degrees. So 90 plus 90 plus 90 is 270. Then this angle here, this tiny angle is alternate to this angle, which is 72. How did you get the 72? The bearing of x from y, which is this line, until you get to this line is 162. Now within that 162, you have a 90 degree here, which ends here, which ends at this very point, this line, 90 degree. Therefore, the remaining one here, this smaller angle from this horizontal line to this line will be 162 minus 90 degree, which gives us 72. And this 72 here is alternate to this angle here. So if here is 72, definitely here too is 72. Therefore, to get the bearing of y from x, you then draw a line from North Pole until you get to this line. Then add all the angles, 90, 90, 90 plus 72, which gives the bearing of y from x. Then the last one, let's draw that again with that cardinal point. Okay, so this angle here, according to the diagram, is 226. And this is point x, while this is point y. Then the question says we should find the bearing of x from y. X from y, okay? Look at y here. And let's get a cardinal point at point y before we can answer that. Also get a cardinal point here because we need it. Finally, let's get the vertical line also. Do the same thing here. Now, while we're doing all of this, we may ask, want to know this tiny angle here. Let me mark it. Let me use a different color. This very angle, we need to know it. And how can we know it? That would be 270 minus 226. Where did I get 270 from, you may ask? This quadrant is 90. This other quadrant, look at it, 90, 90, and the third one is 90. That is, if we go from this very point to this very point here, that would be 270. But we didn't get up to that. With our line, look at the bearing of this very point, this very line ends here. There is a measurement from this line all the way to this side is this 226. Therefore, this remaining one represented here will be 270 minus 226. Since I didn't the line continue to this point, that will be 270 because 90, 90, 90. But it ended here. So to get the remaining one, this small angle here, you just need to subtract 226 rather, from 270 to 270 minus 226. Let's use our manual calculation. That calculator is handy. 10 minus 6 is 4. This remains 6. 6 minus 2. So this angle here is 44 degrees. And this angle, 44 degrees, alternate to this angle. 44. See, therefore, the bearing of x from y, which is this angle here, this angle will be what? 90 minus 44 degree. Thus, the first quadrant like this is 90 degree. But the bearing of x from y is this line here, this line here. We will just measure the angle from north to this line, which is to get that angle, we need to subtract this 44 from 90 because the whole of the quadrant is 90 degree. So this angle is 90 minus 44. 90 minus 44, 10 minus 4, 6. This remains 8. 8 minus 4, 4. So the bearing is 46. In question A, bearing of x from y equal to 46 degree. Why the question B says bearing of y from x. Y from x. This is y here. Then y from x is this angle, which is already given. And that angle is 226 from the question. Bearing of y from x is equal to 226 degree. As we measure the bearing from North Pole to the line. According to the question, the angle is given as 226. That answers the question.